Hello. Hi. Nice to see you back on the channel. Today, I'm going to do a video about some expressions that even native speakers get wrong, and some other expressions that I think that I'm going to call fool's maxims because they seem like good advice, but probably should not always be applied to every situation. And so I'm going to start out with the kinds of expressions where people all often get them wrong by getting the wording wrong or by having learned the inappropriate or incorrect wording. And so um, these I'm calling misinterpreted idioms because these are expressions that are sometimes new versions of old idiomatic expressions that get changed because the wording has been changed. And so what's important about the wording of expressions like this? Well, because idiomatic expressions, don't translate literally because there's always a metaphor involved. Like when we say it's raining cats and dogs, we don't mean there's actually cats or dogs falling from the sky. It's just a metaphor for the violent nature of a downpouring rain. Um, and same as when we say that somebody kicked the bucket, we don't mean they were literally kicking a pail around. So, but everybody does know the meaning of the expression anyway. So I worry about changing the wording of any of these because if you lose the metaphor, then eventually you might lose the meaning to the expression or the value of it. And so, for instance, here's my first misinterpreted idiom. The original idiom is from botany and horticulture, to nip it in the bud. That's, of course, when we have when we see a problem growing, something becoming problematic, is to really cut it off before it can grow into something bigger and the problem only gets worse and worse. Um, and so the misinterpretation of this, it sounds very similar to the original nip it in the bud, is nip it in the butt, which to me, yes, you first of all, you lose the whole metaphor of you see a problem growing. And but I kind of like this one because the imagery is pretty funny. It almost brings to mind a spanking or something. Um, but still, the original expression, I like to keep that. I like to use that one because I like the metaphor. And so, speaking of misinterpreting idioms, another one that people get the wording slightly wrong because it sounds so similar. And so now this other version has taken over a little bit. Is the original idiom was for all intents and purposes. So this is often thrown around in contract law and negotiations and discussions. And it's about for all intents, like what's somebody's intent or what different various intents could they have and purposes. So this is basically saying, yes, this applies for absolutely any reason, any and all reasons. And so the misinterpretation of it is for all intensive purposes. They sound very similar, right? The misinterpretation for all intensive purposes, the original for all intents and purposes, very similar. But it doesn't really matter how intense. your purpose is, how intense you feel about a purpose, that's not the expression because it's not, doesn't really have the same meaning. And so another one that people mix up just because it sounds so similar is they mix up, instead of saying to pass muster, they say to pass mustard. Now, here again, you're losing a metaphor in this. To pass muster, this is a metaphor and allusion to a military inspection. And you can see one such inspection in the little picture there. And what it means is to make sure someone or something is sip safe. Like if we say, oh, he passes muster, that means you already know enough about him to know that he is clean and clear and will be all good. As opposed to the new one, to pass mustard, the misinterpretation of like that makes it sound like there's some allusion to a condiment, and possibly hot dogs or hamburgers or something. Uh, and I don't really like that one, um, because again, you lose the whole metaphor of a military inspection, and that's if somebody passes muster, you know they're good, and you can trust them, and things will go fine. And so, one other expression, well, actually, two expressions that people sort of end up sometimes combining into one, which I think is a problem because it mixes a metaphor, it mixes metaphors. Now, the mixed expression that people are coming up with sometimes is to say to add salt to the injury, which makes some sense. It brings up the idea of, making somebody's pain worse. Okay, that's it. But it sort of mixes two similar metaphors with slightly different connotations. So I myself like to keep these two expressions separate from each other when I use them, and only use the one that I think is more appropriate in the situation. For example, we have rub salt into the wound is one of the original expressions. That really brings up some scary imagery and thoughts of somebody actually rubbing very painful salt into what's already hurts you a lot. So causing more physical pain, exacerbating physical pain. And the other one of the two original expressions is to add insult to injury, which is not so much about adding physical pain, but adding emotional pain on top of physical pain that was already there. Like, we use this as if you keep chastising somebody, criticizing about something they did wrong in the past that they know is a mistake, mistakes they have made, you're just adding insult to injury, which is, kind of bullying somebody a little bit. And so I like to keep those two expressions separate because rubbing salt into the wound, that to me is a lot of physical malice, and adding insult to injury, that's just kind of being mean and being rude a little more. I like to keep those separate that way. So that's why I don't say add salt to the injury. And here's another one I love because the misinterpretation is so similar in the way it sounds to the original, and it got even more popularized by a rap song in the 90s. And so the original idiom is there's an expression dog eat dog, which some people hyphenate as one compound word, other people don't. That's why I included both spellings there. Um, so when something is a dog eat dog situation, um, is there are players involved who are so ruthlessly competitive that they're gonna do you some harm more likely, that they don't care who they hurt, who their actions hurt, as long as it helps them get ahead. That's what the original idiom is about. And the way it portrays that is dog eat dog world, dog eat dog. I mean, we're talking actual cannibalism here, canine cannibalism, which is a very scary thought and something, I'd rather never have to think about. Um, so for that reason, I kind of like the newer version, Doggy Dog World, with Snoop Dogg. Okay, he didn't invent this from scratch on his own, the newer expression. It was already a way that people were changing dog eat dog world into doggy dog world, but he certainly capitalized it in 1993 when he put out a single called Doggy Dog World from his album Doggy Style. And Snoop at the time was going by Snoop Doggy Dog. So it was a way to capitalize, help push his career, and it's clever. And I do appreciate the less actual eating of each other involved with it. And I hope you enjoy the little pictures there of I believe that's a Doberman Pinscher who seems to bear a striking resemblance to Snoop Dogg. Anyway, um, so my last idiom where people are getting wrong or right, and this one I call it a disputed idiom because this is one I've actually seen people and heard people argue about. The idiom, the original idiom, is when you want to mean I don't care at all about this. I don't give a hoot. Well, that's another idiom, but I don't care at all. The idiom, which is basically sarcasm in use, is say, I could care less. And the reason it maintains its status as an idiom is the sarcasm, is that the words you're putting out mean very much a different thing than your intended meaning, which is I don't care at all. And if you're saying I could care less, somehow that implies that you could care a certain amount because you could care less. And so that doesn't fit the meaning of what you wanted to say, which is I don't care at all. So that's why some people argue for saying I couldn't care less because it's more to the point, more literal. But the problem with there is you're no longer using an idiom if the words you're saying have a little literal meaning that corresponds to the intended meaning. It's not really an idiom anymore. And some people have argued that when you use could care less versus when you use couldn't care less has to do with the amount of formal versus informal. Like they would say that in more formal or academic settings, you should use couldn't care less. So drop the sarcasm and use the correct version. Um, and it's only when being informal that you should use the idiom, the sarcasm of I could care less. But I disagree with that because I think both saying I could care less and I couldn't care less are both informal, right? Could care less, the sarcasm makes that pretty informal, and couldn't care less, that contraction in couldn't, saying couldn't instead of could not, that makes it informal too. So if you want a formal way to say it, skip the idiom and just go for I could not care less. Now, the other kind of saying I wanted to talk about today are not ones where people are changing the wording. They're Fool's maxims. These are the problem with them is that they sometimes add up to bad advice. And the thing about a maxim, which a maxim is also, called an adage or an aphorism or even a metaphor or most often a proverb. So a proverb or a maxim is supposed to have a general nugget of truth to it, which makes it a principle that can be helpful towards guiding your actions in life, guiding your contact in life. And so people trust these maxims and proverbs to be good advice in every single situation. Now, the ones that are fool's maxims, that I call them that way, is because sometimes they add up to bad advice because we cannot apply them to every situation. They're not universally applicable, as we say. Um, so that means I think they're very bad maxims if you got to be super careful about when you apply them. They're not really uh, general good advice in the first place. And this reminds me of an episode I've watched of Gilmore Girls, where as you can see on the screen here, one of the people is Rory Gilmore, one of the title characters. Um, and she's arguing, well, the scene that I'm talking about, she's arguing with her college boyfriend, Logan Huntsberger, and he's a rich guy she met at Yale, and so they were having an argument because she was really calling him out, having been irresponsible in the past, having acted irresponsibly in the past, like his past actions means, you know, maybe he can't be trusted in the future if he's going to keep doing the same things. And so Logan says to her, he says, past performance is not an indication of future performance. I mean, past performance is no indication of future performance. And as soon as he said that, I thought, wow, that's some terrible advice. um, because how are you going to know if somebody can be responsible in the future unless you've seen them be responsible in the past, or at least you have not seen them being irresponsible? So to me, that seemed like a fool's maxim. And Rory agreed with me on that. Apparently, she said immediately, wise men call that a sucker's maxim. Um, and I guess we both agree because like I said, sometimes if you're judging somebody's future future potential of being a responsibility, their past actions, I think, are a very good thing to look at. Now, next, this brings me to the fourth maxim that is one of the proverbs that I included in a previous video about proverbs, some French proverbs and some English proverbs. Um, and I brought this one up. In French, it's mieux vaut tard que jamais, and in English, it's better late than never. And this made me want to talk about the downsides to this proverb, not just the upsides, because this is a fool's maxim, because it's not always true that doing something late will be any better than doing it never at all. For example, in contract law, let's say you have a service and goods and all that you're supposed to provide. Let's say we're talking about a couple hires a caterer for their wedding day, for their wedding reception, and the reception is supposed to start at 3 o'clock and go to 7 o'clock. And so the caterer signs a contract saying they will be there with the food and beverage by 2 o'clock so that the whole reception can go off without a hitch. And they even confirm this a couple days before the event. And then on the day of the event, that caterer and the food and beverage are nowhere to be found. And it becomes 3 o'clock, then 4 o'clock. And the couple gets so desperate and upset that they just cancel the rest of the um, reception because what kind of a party is it if there's nothing to eat and nothing to drink? And so then let's say um, the caterer ends up showing up at 11 o'clock that night, which is long after the reception was supposed to be over in the first place. And then they say, oh, yeah, here's all the food and beverages, and here's the bill. They might not have any right to do that because let's say, for instance, the couple, instead of canceling the reception altogether, they had to quick hire a new caterer and it cost them tons of money to do it last minute. The first caterer who stood them up at the time they were supposed to be there might actually be held liable financially for all the additional expenses that this couple incurred. So better late than never, not always true. Sometimes the law says same thing. And it's all so to the point that sometimes if you get there too late, there's no way you can do enough to really make it right. And another example of that would be, let's say if somebody goes into cardiac arrest, um, and they stop breathing. And so what would be the normal way to help save them from that is CPR, right? But CPR is a kind of thing where you gotta pretty much do it right away. If you come in half an hour later and just then say, oh, I'm late, but yeah, let's start the CPR, you might as well not be doing anything at all because you lost every possible chance to save them. So again, sometimes, yeah, showing up too late means you can never make it right. And that's why I would give a maxim of retort to better late than never. My retort to that would be, hey, too little, too late, you know? But anyway, that's just my personal feelings, but I think I've given a couple good examples of why this is a fool's maxim because it cannot always apply. Now, another one that doesn't always apply is YOLO. So for you only live once. And again, this could be sometimes good advice. It seems like a good advice to be all life is short. You might never get a chance to do this, so take the opportunity and enjoy your life. Get this new experience. All very good advice, unless why I call this a fool's maxim is sometimes people use this expression because it's an expression, so it must always be true, right? But they use this to justify doing things that are so dangerous that it might actually put an end to the one life that the person has. They only live once. So I'm afraid of this maxim because I hate it when people have an expression to hide behind to justify some ridiculously crazy behavior and dangerous behavior. And that's why to retort to this, YOLO, I would use three different expressions. One is cats have 9 lives, but you only live once for two. And so three, you're better safe than sorry, right? Because you only live once, so stay safe enough so as not to end that one life that you've got. I think that's super important, but maybe this is just because I'm a fraidy cat in general. Um, But anyway, so one last expression that I dislike because people hide behind it to justify doing sometimes bad things is I've provided here three different versions of what's basically the same expression saying the same thing. So it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, or it's easier to ask forgiveness than to get permission, or even it's easier to apologize than to get permission. So yes, in some cases, this can be good advice when decisive action needs to be taken in order to make anything good happen. And yet, it's impossible to get the so-called permissions to do the administrative steps that you're supposed to do first every once in a while. It might apply very well that it's better to ask for forgiveness later, to say I'm sorry later, than to ask if you can do it ahead of time. But I don't like this one because let's say in any situation where you have multiple parties involved, multiple people with multiple varying opinions on the matter, and you go ahead and don't get one neighbor's permission to remove the fence along the property line when technically it was on the neighbor's property and not yours, so you would have had to ask for permission legally. And then you just don't because you want to put up this other thing instead that they're going to hate. Um, no, this is terrible because this might get you into a bunch of legal trouble and it might be the end of ever having a cordial relationship with your neighbor again. Anyway, um, so yeah, I'm glad that you guys stuck around to watch all my fool's maxims and misinterpreted idioms and all that. Listen, if you have an idea of an expression that you really like or one you really don't like, please put them in the comments. That would be a cool uh, discussion starter. And also, if you haven't hit the like button yet, please hit it now. That would help me out so much. And yeah, I will see you around next time.